Welcome back. Now we've been joined in the studio by legal practitioner Kelechi Anwu to speak on some of those developments as the election approaches. There are a number of issues we have to discuss today and their effect on the elections and post-elections. That is after May or after February 2023. Welcome to the program, Mr. Kelechi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here again.
Thank you for coming. All right, our phone lines are open, so you can call in to make your contributions and ask your questions. Now, going straight into it, we'll start with one of the issues we spoke about in our update, which is the court judgment or the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the Senate President Ahmed Lawan and against Machina, who was his so to speak, his rival or his detractor, whatever you want to call it. But that being said, I'd just like you to know how the layman sees it. The layman out there sees a situation where there was a primary that was held and a candidate emerged, and another candidate who did not participate in said primary has now been deemed by the Supreme Court to be the legitimate candidate. So that being said, what really happened? Can you break it down for us, the legal perspective, and what happened? How did that judgment come about?
If you look at it, the judgment we have at hand, the judgment that was delivered yesterday, it espouses much on our electoral jurisprudence, and going forward, you could see it was a judgment delivered by a 5-man panel. And out of the 5-man panel, 3 gave their nods that Lawan could be returned, and then 2 were on the divergent views. Now, if you look at it critically, these are one of the issues that we've talked about over time. Now, there were elections, primary elections that were held, that of the one that brought in Machina, and another subsequent primary elections that was also held, the one that brought in Lawal. Now, these are 2 primary elections, 2 conflicting actually. Now, you would say which is right and which is wrong. They went to court, challenged from the Federal High Court to the Court of Appeal and to the Supreme Court. Now, on the basis of what the Supreme Court agreed that Lawal was rightfully elected was that the means of initiating that action was not proper.
What action?
Now, the means of initiating the action that Machina initiated at the Federal High Court was not proper. Now, the Supreme Court held from what it is, that Supreme Court held that he ought to initiate that action by means of writ of summons. Now, previously there has been a judgment of the court owing to the fact that when you have issues concerning crime, when you are impinging on crime, when you make references to crime, the right mode of commencing an action is by writs of summons. Now, when it has to do with pre-election matters. Well, in this situation, the Machina candidate commenced his action by originating summons. Now, going contrary to the earlier decision of the Supreme Court. Now, but be that as it may, if you just oppose the 2 situations, one is on the technical grounds and one is on the substantive ground. The 2 Supreme Court justices that went on the substantive ground actually were of the opinion that yes, there were primary elections that was held on May 29th, and that election was monitored. You recall that by virtue of the Electoral Act, for an election to be valid, it must be monitored by INEC, and the reports must be issued. Now, these 2 justices of the Supreme Court are saying the fact that these elections were monitored, the names, somebody emerged from that election was not cancelled, so it does not give the right for any further election. But the other 3 are of the view that since there is no point going into the substantive matter, your means of commencing this action, you alleged fraud, you alleged forgery, you have imputed crimes, you ought to commence this by way of originating, by way of writ of summons, calling witnesses, testify and prove your case beyond reasonable doubt. It is no longer on the probability of evidence, but beyond reasonable doubt, because crime is involved. Now, the Supreme Court's decision is final. I am not here to fault the Supreme Court's decision. I am only here to analyze on the basis of what is law and what is facts. Now, from the two decisions we have, you could see clearly that we could ask the question, could the Supreme Court have held differently? To my humble opinion, I would say Supreme Court would have held differently. They could have looked at the merit of the entire case, and not on the basis of technicality. You cannot slaughter justice on the altar of technicalities.
But can I cut in there? When you say this was done on the issue of technicality, and the issue is that the proper method wasn't used to initiate the case and whatnot, could the Supreme Court have said, this case doesn't hold water, you must initiate it the proper way? Is that something that can happen?
Now, it could happen if it were on a normal balance. It could have happened if it were on a normal ground of initiating court proceeding. But bear in mind that we have 180 days from the Federal High Court to conclude every electoral matters. We have 60 days to conclude matter at the Court of Appeal, and we have another 60 days to conclude matter at the Supreme Court. So, never which way, if you do not complete your matter within those periods and the time have elapsed, the Supreme Court have heard in plethora of cases that it does not have, no court in Nigeria has the right to enlarge the time, except on circumstances of maybe unforeseen circumstances like out of war or things that we cannot have control over. But you see those 180 days, the Supreme Court has emphasized that it is like the rocks of Gibraltar. It cannot be moved. That 180 days is static. It doesn't move and nothing changes. So now, would the Supreme Court has held differently? Yes, it would have held differently if that we still had let's say we were halfway into the 180 and there was still time to remit those matters back to the trial court. They would have had that power to remit those matters. But at the instant case, they've exhausted the 180 days and they've exhausted the 60 days given by the Court of Appeal. Now we are at the 60 days of the Supreme Court. Now, would the Supreme Court treat the matter, retry the matter on their own? They do not have such powers to retry the matter on their own. The only court that would have, could have sent those matters back to the Federal High Court if they still had time. But time is of essence, and they have run out of time.
Yes, that's very interesting. So the question now is, the obvious question that we can't hide, is it that the lawyers of Machina were not aware of the proper way of initiating, or was this an error? What do you think happened?
You wouldn't blame the lawyers. The decision was actually given sometime November last year. The first time this decision about commencing an action was actually given first time last year. In fact, I got to know of it while I was making researches in one of the cases I handled at the Federal High Court. Now, if you blame the lawyers or you blame the litigants, it does not still solve our questions. But the point is, the court ought to look beyond the technicalities of what you initiate your matters. This is like the court taking us back to the 13th centuries of the Old English law, where the common laws were as it were. You have no, but you understand, we also have the equity. Equity have to come into play in most cases. Now, where something ought to be done, ought to be seen as done. Now, in these circumstances, we have this matter beforehand. I believe the Supreme Court ought to have looked at the substance of the matter, other than looking at the form upon which it was commenced. Now, in going into the substance of the matter, you could decide, was there a primary election? Because the contention is primary election. You could ask the questions, was there a primary election? Was it monitored by the INEC according to the Electoral Act? Was there a report by INEC according to the Electoral Act? can a subsequent election be held when there was an election? Now these are questions that box the mind of every Nigerian, and these questions are unanswered. Now, if you recall when APC issued out their form, they brought up the first mischief to every electorate, to every aspirant. The first mischief of APC was inserting a withdrawal form at the back of every form. Every aspirant who today turned the candidate and who even did not win signed off a withdrawal automatically. That was a mischief, and that is the contention in law. No, in law, a withdrawal need to be. It does not. You do not need to coerce a withdrawal. A withdrawal should be free. It should be a consentful withdrawal, not a withdrawal by coercion, a withdrawal by misrepresentation. Now, Martina on his own is alleging that this withdrawal, the withdrawal form he signed, he was misrepresented into making those inputs in the withdrawal. So you see where the mischief is all about. Now, if you agree with me, that mischief by APC have cost both Nigerians and the electorate and even the legal jurisprudence a whole lot. And that is why we are here. If we need to move beyond where we are, the courts also need to move beyond the rules of technicalities and look at the substance of the matter that is brought before them. If the substance is meritorious, you go ahead and allow such appeals, other than slaughtering it in the altar of technicality.
All right. Speaking about technicality, sometimes it's known that they are made to avoid certain other issues. Now, you raised the point that there was issues of criminality in what Martina was alleging. Does it mean that if the Supreme Court ruled against Ahmed Lawan or in favor of Martina, it means automatically that it confirms that criminality, that the Senate President or the party was involved in forgery and all those things? Could that have been another controversy if the decision had gone the other way? Would they have to be filed, would criminal charges have to be filed against them? What would the implications if the Supreme Court of the other wing? Yes, if the Supreme Court has held that there was a criminal conduct, yes, it will open up another angle of litigation or prosecution. But however, you look at this country, you look at the heirs of prosecutions in this country, you get to find out that people do not even pick up prosecutorial matters that are up. So when things like this, I wouldn't be surprised if things like this slide. Even when the Supreme Court have held in such a case, because don't be surprised, it was held, assuming without considering that the Supreme Court actually held that there was crime committed, maybe forgery, perjury, or whatever it is. It opens a window for another matter, not in that particular matter. You could prosecute, but the power of prosecution lies with the government. Yes.
And if I, as a private practitioner, applies for a fiat, because for me to prosecute as a private person, I need the fiat of the Attorney General. That fiat is the authority Attorney General gives you to prosecute. If I apply for that fiat, I will be refused instantly, or that my file will not even be attended to. So we look at the country we are into. You see, even if the Supreme Court had held, would you settle issues by technically avoiding them? No, it wouldn't be right. It would be right that you address this issue the way they are. If there were crimes, you give in your judgment that there were crimes, and let justice be done as it is accordingly.
All right, so that's an interesting breakdown. Still on issues of electoral matters and the effect on elections pre and post. Let's talk about another judgment we've seen this time around, not from the Supreme Court, but as related to the Court of Tribunal, if I got that correct, as relating to the Osun State judgment, where the governor has been sacked and the former governor has been declared the winner of the Osun State elections. I'd like to get your thoughts and your breakdown on that, because that's another issue where persons might be using some sort of layman ideology to understand it. What really happened there?
It is too early in the day to celebrate either on its side or to mourn on its side. Don't forget there have been a lot of judgments from the tribunal which has been overturned over time. Now, if you look at, we've had, starting from the days of P2B, Adams Oshomole, Nyasun Wike, Rotimi Chibika Amechi, there are very many of them. So you look at it, you see. Now, the point I am trying to make is, the tribunal based their judgment on the beavers. Now, INEC on their own is saying, yes, you applied for beavers, but at the time you were given these beavers, you had an incomplete data. And this incomplete data is what the tribunal based their judgment on. Now, if you look at it, you have an option, even at the Court of Appeal, to bring in fresh evidence, assuming they were not there, as at the point when those matters were treated. Now, if that judgment of the tribunal might not see the end of the light of the day if it gets a proper scrutiny by the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. Reasons being that you cannot disenfranchise an entire group of polling units of particularly the winner, and you leave that of the person who came second. It does not count. Though we have had this kind of judgment before, if you look at the one we had in Imo State, but at the moment our electoral jurisprudence is expanding, and with the advent of the card reader, if INEC alleges that you had an incomplete data, now we have the full data. You have to look at what it is. If there is actually a full data, now it then beckons on parties to either call in expert witnesses, expert analysts, data analysts, to come and verify if there were actually any miss in any link, if there were data that were not appropriately recorded. But wherein those data are not appropriately recorded, they were incorrect as at the time they were given to a party, as it were. Now, the Court of Appeal has the onerous task to either extray those facts, extray those data, come up with a more conclusive and a more espoused judgment on those facts and figures, the data that are available. You cannot, an incomplete data does not make up what it is. But if it is left for the Supreme Court to look at these data, if these data are not what were given and what the decision of the tribunal was based on, then the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court might deviate. They might deviate. So it's a 50-50 chance. So it's not yet to rule for any of the party.
All right, that's interesting. I think that's perhaps good news for some of the parties involved in that. Yeah, no, let's move forward to some of the issues trending and the effect on the elections. We've been seeing, still on the judiciary cases, we have a case of some governors reportedly taking the federal government to court. We even saw a ruling yesterday limiting or stopping the federal government and the CBN from extending, or is it, pardon me, yes, the deadline.
Yes, it's an interesting time to be a lawyer. So it's an interesting time to be a lawyer.
So what's going on there?
The governors and the attorney generals have three, actually. I think that of Kaduna, Zamfara, and one other place, Kogi State. Yes, they've activated the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Now, there are instances where parties can sue at the Supreme Court directly without going to the Federal High Court or the Court of Appeal. Those instances happen where states and states sue each other, when states and federal governments sue each other, when the National Assembly and the state, or National Assembly and the federal government sue each other. Now, one of those instances have been activated by the suit filed by these three governors, where they are seeking the Supreme Court to interpret these sections vis-a-vis the policies, the cashless policies. But before they went to that court, they have already, some Nigerians were smarter than them and went to court. But that does not mean that one will abate. It will not, because that is a higher court than the FCT High Court. Now, some Nigerians, some political parties actually, went to court, obtained a court order on the ground, on several grounds that, one, there are actually cash. The CBN is right in its policy of cashless policy, and the CBN has done its part by releasing cash. But however, there were 30 defendants in that list, of which included 26 were banks. Now, those banks, from the 4th defendant to the 30th defendant, are accomplices in this sabotage of the Naira. Now, these days you begin to see instances where people say the Naira in the parallel market, the Naira in the POS market. It's no longer, in your business news you could see analysis of dollars in the parallel market, the Nigeria Stock Exchange, what dollar was. But now we have Naira in the parallel market. What is Naira selling in your area? It's very, very annoying that we have to deal with this in a country that is as large as Nigeria. Now, the ruling of the court, FCT High Court, is to the effect that all parties should maintain status quo. There should not be any withdrawal, or there should not be any extension. All parties must maintain status quo, pending the determination of a pending action they have filed. Because for you to get such orders, there must be an existing action. So it is in these existing actions that they brought in an interim. This interim is for the meantime. For the meantime, while we await the determination of the substances suit, this, for the meantime, this is what is the guiding order. So the FCT High Court found it on the proper light to issue that order. Every party should maintain status quo. No one should remove or add. No one should extend or bring back. Every party must maintain status quo. And that is leaving it as it is. 10th is 10th. Nobody goes near 10th. That judgment is valid until set aside by the Superior Court. Now, while we are waiting...
But does the court itself have that authority to
yes,
do that?
The court has every authority to...
I'm trying to get the comments here, but it's not quite
if someone,
easy.
Yes,
but,
someone will say they could have gone to the Federal High Court.
Yeah, but now the Senior Advocate of Nigeria, and who reminded us very recently that is at the height of his career. I'm talking about Festus Keyamo, the Minister of State for Labour and Employment. He made a tweet yesterday around the time this judgment came, where he said he wasn't commenting on anything, but that no court, he quoted something which is what I'm trying to get here, but it's not quite forthcoming. But anyway, the gist of it is that he said no court can interfere in the duties or the responsibilities of government bodies without some other process. What do you make of that? That basically the court cannot say CBN do this or CBN do not do this.
It is not true. It is not very, very, very true. The laws are made, and there are plethora of laws. These institutions are guided by laws. Now, under the system we operate in Nigeria, we have the judiciary who interprets the law, we have the legislatures who make these laws, and we have the executive who implements these laws. Now, these laws are binding on these institutions. Don't forget, once a judgment of court is given, it is not for you to pick and choose whether to obey it or not to obey it. Once there is a valid judgment of court, a judgment that has been pronounced, it remains valid until it abates. It remains valid until it is being quashed by a higher court. Now, it is not for my learned senior and learned friend to sit on his place and argue the judgment of court or order of court. It is for him to actually apply to be joined as a party and probably apply to appeal that judgment. That judgment is valid until it is set aside.
All right, fair enough. No, I'd just like your thoughts generally on the policy itself. What's your take on it, and what's happening in the country at the moment?
It is nice that this policy is coming, but it was not well thought out. It is very, very nice. You could see the hardship it is causing to the Nigerian populace, but that notwithstanding, it's a very nice policy. Over time, we've had people stash naira notes. It's not something that are done. It's an illegal act. There is a law in this country that provides that you cannot have more than 5 million naira in cash. But there are people in this country that have over 5 billion naira in cash. Now, this policy comes to checkmate those things. It might cause unhealthy effects on the populace, but it is for the greater good, and the greater effect will be felt by those who have stacked over billions of naira at home and refuse to either invest those monies or share it amongst Nigerians. They do not recycle those monies. Now, it kills an economy. When you have money that you store, money is supposed to be it's supposed to be floating. Now, a country's currency is on a floating status, meaning it exchanges. It moves from one person to another. It does not make sense for you to have it in your house. The value does not appreciate, or it rather depreciate. It increases the inflation we have in the country. But when you see money being exchanged, money is being invested, there are a lot of ideas that are uninvested. There are a lot of persons looking for capital. Now, assuming these monies that are being stashed in various houses of politicians have been invested in these young ideas, we might have had a booming economy. But at the moment, we have monies that are being restricted and stashed in houses, and they are not being used. So this affects our economy grossly. That policy of cashless policy, in a way, checkmates this stashing. We have less cash. You have to do your transfer online. But the greatest saboteurs of this policy have to be the banks, the financial institution. Over time, within this period that we've had this policy, and all of a sudden, the USSD code stopped working. You cannot open your mobile apps. This is a sabotage on the face of it. And to worsen the situation, there have been a lot of arrests being made by bank managers holding currency, including the one that was made yesterday by EFCC. Imagine a bank manager holding a new naira note in the bank safe. It does not make sense for such policy. The beauty of this policy is that it gets naira on a floating level. It floats within Nigeria. It floats within citizens. Citizens have rights to access both the cash and on its liquid and solid forms. So you see, this policy is a good policy, but the implementation should be looked at.
That's fair enough, but some persons wonder if the effects will be enough to, or the positives will be enough to counteract the negatives, and I believe it's basically a political play by players at work. So the question now is, going by economics and all of that, having little money in circulation or not having all the money in circulation contributes very little, or if not very little, but to an extent, a small amount to inflation and all of that, compared to other things such as when the central bank prints billions, if not trillions of naira to help the budget, especially with the whole ways and means provision. I do know that there is supposed to be a law governing that the central bank cannot print above a certain amount, but it's believed that they've already crossed that threshold and nothing has happened. And that is what, one of the reasons that there's a lot of inflation, and that this issue is not as big as it is made to look, and it is more political than it is economic. As much as I would not agree with the political undertone that is attached to it, because I am not a politician. I am I deal with facts and figures. Now, the CBN on their own is not restricting the usage of naira, not the notes.
when I mean naira both in liquid and solid form, in floating and in its liquid form, in its solid form. Now, the policy entrenches that you can make use of various means, electronic means of transfers. You can transfer as much money as you want. The only thing it is affecting is that you cannot have that access to raw cash. But however, you can make your transfers. Assuming you want to make transfers of 100 million, you can transfer up to 100 million. The money begins to float from one person to another, and that way you checkmate where it is going, who has crossed the boundaries, who is which money is illegally taken. Now, even the government within this year is implementing the very fact that you cannot make withdrawal of government money. Every money that is coming to you as a government worker must pass through the online portal. You must receive it online. So this policy is in a way curtailing the uses of cash. It is entrenching the use of technology, the use of mobile monies, the use of monies that you can make transfers, monies that can easily be traced.
What about the Naira redesign in particular?
Yes. In its entirety, you cannot have an economy without cash. But however, there should be limit to what the amount of cash that should be in circulation. You need to do more of an online transaction. You need to do more of a transaction that is visible, a transaction that has a trace. Now, previously, people could buy properties and do their transaction over 500 million with cash. But at the moment, there is limit to the cash that is available, and all you need to do is to key into the mobile and floating channels and make your transfers. If those are not permissible for you, if those are not available for you, that means you cannot use that amount of cash anymore. We've gone, like you said, we've crossed that Rubicon where there were so much cash in play. There was so much cash available at the disposal of Nigerians and mostly politicians. Now, the CBN policy tends to recall those cash. See. Your amount, the value of your money is still intact. But however, you need to use a proper channel. You need to use another medium other than cash. Now, why are politicians so interested in this cash thing? Nobody is saying it's taking your money. Why? When ASU was on strike for 8 months, nobody said a word. Nobody visited the president. Nobody went to court. But now it affects the politician who has stack of cash in his chambers. Mr. Politician, you can take your cash back. You can transact by the online means. You can make your transfers. Your cash is intact. The value is still the same. Why are you so bothered about the cash? So it affects Nigerians. However, it is the price the Nigerian populace will pay. But I believe the higher price will be paid by politicians who fail to redeem their cash from now to the 10th of this month.
All right. We'll go back to that issue, and then we'll talk about whether these politicians might not have already subverted the process, as we're seeing that the notes seem to be more accessible to certain persons. But that will be after a break. Let's go on a quick break now. When we return, the program continues on the discussion on the state of the nation and issues around elections ahead of the D-Day. Stay with us. We'll be right back.